What's up, folks? Thanks to all of you who have been reading the blog. I hope that the content of the blog has been helpful for you. Thanks for sharing it. Thanks for commenting and messaging me about it. It's been really great to have the conversations that I've been able to have with a lot of you who have been reading it. So this week I'm sitting in soccer practice, and I decided rather than writing it that I would actually share it via video. So this is a vlog, if you will, as the kids call it these days. I'm sure kids every day have, never mind. This week, the topic or the content this week is is sensitive, and I'm not qualified to do a deep dive into this content, and I'm not qualified simply because I'm not a woman. And yes, this week I would like to talk about how we handle the stories that we hear when a woman comes forward to make the claim that she has been the victim of sexual abuse. Before we go any further, I want to share a story that happened in our lives. My wife and I were working at a nonprofit, and while we were at that nonprofit, we had an intern, a female intern who worked with us, and we had a contract with an outside organization that was going to partner with us on some of the things that we were doing with the nonprofit. And this outside organization had a training, actually here in California. And we flew out to California with the intern, and we were out here for the training. And while we were here, something happened with the female intern and one of the men who was leading the training that we didn't hear about until after we had landed back where we lived. And once we got back, she came forward and she shared a story of what was an inappropriate interaction, an inappropriate physical interaction that she had with this male leader of this organization. And so once she came forward and told us what happened, I picked up the phone and I called the head of the organization and I said, hey, here's what our female intern is saying happened to her. And his first response to me was, well, how well do you know her? And that always rubbed me the wrong way, that response just kind of, this was many, many years ago, well before the movements that we're witnessing in culture today, long before any of that. But even in that moment, something about that response just struck me as like, I don't know if that's right. But I didn't really say much about it. Come to find out, what the intern alleged happened indeed happened, and the young man was fired from the organization. But I want to go back to the response, because I think that the response is too frequent a response for us when we hear a woman come forward to say, I've been the victim of something inappropriate, something sexually inappropriate, something that made me feel unsafe, that made me feel like I was backed into a corner. And I feel like too often the response is somewhat of an interrogation of the victim who's coming forward to say, something happened to me. It's almost as if we are expecting them to really prove that what they're saying is accurate before we will actually hear them out and listen to them. It's like there's a stain on them for just coming forward and saying this happened. It's like we look at them sideways, and for some reason there's a distrust, often, not always, but often, of a victim who comes forward to say this happened to me. And I feel like that's unfortunate. It's like we are doubly victimizing victims who have the courage to come forward and say, I was put in a situation that I didn't ask for, and I'm being courageous to come forward to say something. I think that courage should be rewarded. And I think that when a person comes forward with a story, when someone who's been marginalized, when someone who has been victimized comes forward and says, this is my story, we as the community of people who are hearing it should run into that situation, embrace that person, look deeply into their eyes, and fully understand and hear the story before we start to judge and interrogate. Because I think it's this interrogation and this judgment that is the reason why we say it requires so much courage to begin with, to come forward, because our society has in many ways become unwelcoming of people's stories of pain, especially when those stories of pain involve receiving the pain from a person who has privilege or power. Before we wrap, there's a story that's told in the Bible of a woman who had an issue of blood, which for our purposes is a woman who basically couldn't stop bleeding. This made her ceremonially unclean. This made her unable to sleep in the same room as another human being. This made her a bit of an outcast. And she had this issue for 12 years and no one could cure her. No one, and perhaps this is me saying this. This could be totally wrong. So any of you theologians out there, before you send me emails or start some campaign to slander my name, this is me saying this. It could be totally wrong, but perhaps no one could cure her because no one was willing to get close enough to help her. I don't know. I mean, she was a woman, and she was living in a man's world with a stain on her. She was unclean, and she had the courage to bring an issue that she didn't ask for to a Jewish rabbi named Jesus, who happened to be walking through her town. And she got into the crowd. Scripture says she got into the crowd and she touched the hem of his garment, and she was made whole. And Jesus felt what happened, and he stopped in the crowd. He said, "Who touched me?" And of course, if you've read the Bible or if you've been to church, you've heard this story probably a million times. So I won't go any further than that of what happens with Jesus, because the point for me today is not the healing power of Jesus, which is awesome, but is what happens next. This woman, she sees Jesus stop. She comes forward and she says, "It was me who touched you." She tells Jesus exactly what happened to her, what she'd been living with. And the story goes on to say, Jesus said, "You know what? Your faith has made you whole." And that woman was made whole. And when she came forward with her scary story, with her issue that she didn't ask for, when she brought it forward to Jesus, even though she was ceremonially unclean, she really shouldn't have been touching him to begin with. In that society, that was a cultural taboo, a cultural no-no. You didn't do that in that culture. But she came forward to admit she did, and she was met with grace, and she was met with love, and she was met with she was met with good news that was, you're free. She wasn't penalized for telling her story. She wasn't penalized for being a woman in a man's world with an issue that should have kept her away. She wasn't penalized for it. She was rewarded for it. And I believe that today, our culture, especially those of us who are followers of Jesus, people of faith, we should be running towards the stories of people who are saying, "Hey, I was the victim of something that I didn't ask for, and I felt powerless, and now I'm trying to regain that power by coming forward to tell my story." We should be listening intently, not interrogating, not accusing, not being skeptical, but listening. Thanks for watching.